We begin on a decidedly exploitative note. A film that brought us bikers and Nazis, with a little Colonel Sanders thrown in for good measure.
The shocking scenes you're about to see are not suggested for the weak or immature. If you cannot take it, we advise you to now patronize a concession stand or look away from the screen during this preview of Hell's Bloody Devils. Hell's Bloody Devils are members of a wild cycle gang, always looking for trouble. They're rougher, tougher, and meaner than all the others as they zoom their motorcycles towards the most violent and sadistic acts. Hell's Bloody Devils is the frightening story of the attempted takeover of the USA by a mad political group. Using the meanest motorcycle riders they can find to rape and pillage their way into power. Find out all about the secret criminal society that uses violent motorcycle gangs to do their dirty work. No one is safe from their cruel and violent plans.
Oh, an Al Adamson special, yes. That movie, I think it wasn't released. I think it had to escape.
Producer-director Al Adamson was born into filmmaking. His parents both worked on the B-movie side of the industry. Adamson not only followed in their footsteps, he practically reveled in taking that B and tossing it as far down the alphabet as it could go. Drive-ins were invented for filmmakers like Adamson. Hell's Bloody Devils was fashioned from a film he had already shot called The Fakers. Director of Blood and Flesh, the real life and ghastly death of Al Adamson, David Gregory.
It was a spy thriller originally, and that film was completed, and they tried to sell it to television at the time, and there were no takers. So basically the film was shelved until the biker film phenomenon started, and so they went back and actually shot new footage of bikers and actually inserted a biker subplot into this movie, The Fakers, which was a very different film from a biker movie originally, but it had a subplot about counterfeit money being used to refinance the Nazi party, and so they decided to make the bikers a gang of Nazis, and so they were able to somehow make a connection between, the bad guys who were Nazis and the biker gang who were also wearing swastikas and doing nasty things.
Author of Schlockorama, the films of Al Adamson, David Kano.
With the B movies, what they used to do is they would hire real biker gangs to do the biker films because you didn't have to hire a bunch of extras and get costumes and all of that. And basically, if you just paid their gas and fed them, gave them beer or whatever, they would do the movies.
Actor John Gabriel.
I mean, it only cost about $150,000. I think they lost every penny. When you're in Hollywood and you're hunting around for a job, it's very difficult to turn down a starring role in an independent movie. I grabbed it. I'm not sorry I did. I had a wonderful time.
Laszlo Kovacs, he was involved in the cinematography. What stage did he come in?
So I believe he was involved in The Fakers, the original film. And by the time they went back to shoot Hell's Bloody Devils, Laszlo had moved on.
Yeah, and Laszlo went on to Easy Rider.
Yes, exactly. So when Hell's Bloody Devils came out, in the trailer it says, from the man who shot Easy Rider. Even though he didn't shoot any of the biker stuff, he just shot the James Bond type stuff.
And when I was watching it the other week, I was particularly delighted when out of the blue, Colonel Sanders pops up.
Right, yeah. Right, yeah, and this is one of the oldest stories in Al folklore, that everybody probably learns pretty quickly.
Al loved Kentucky Fried Chicken, and it was a cheap way to feed his crew, but Al always wanted to get things cheaper than cheap, so he decided to put Colonel Sanders in the movie for promotion for KFC, and he has, the KFC bucket is in the film, and a whole scene takes place in KFC. So in return, they got free Kentucky Fried Chicken to feed the cast and crew.
There's so many crazy stories about what happened on Al Adamson movies. There's all kinds of nutty things that happen when you have no money and you're flying by the seat of your pants.
prior to Hell's Bloody Devils, what would be the one movie of Al Adamson's that you'd most recommend?
Well, obviously Satan Sadist, because that's kind of like what launched everything. That's kind of what launched him and the company that him and producer Sam Sherman had, Independent International Pictures.
Satan's Sadists are not a pack of imitation angels. They're modern rebels, warped by the generation gap and turned on to everything by the torrid tempo of the strange age we're living in.
You know, the two big movies that everyone will always remember from them are Satan Sadist and Dracula versus Frankenstein. Satan Sadist was kind of like what launched them into business in the summer of '69. And then a lot of movies he was working on in bits and pieces started to come out. Like, and Horror of the Blood Monsters was one of them. Hell's Bloody Devils was one of them. And, you know, these were movies that he was working on in bits and pieces over the years that he was never able to finish. So, you know, some of it would be shot one year, some of it would be shot another year, and you would see all the continuity, you know, like the hair changing, and, you know, you could tell that they were shot during different periods. Blood of Ghastly Horror is a really funny one in that regard, where you can definitely see what was shot in '65, what was shot in '67, what was shot in '71. Okay, and as you may or may not know, you know, Dracula versus Frankenstein was two totally different films that were kind of mashed together. Or I shouldn't say two totally different films. It was originally a whole different film, and then they added Dracula and Frankenstein.
A doctor who serves the dead. A dead man who controls the doctor and a living creature horribly created from the mangled corpses of their victims. Dracula versus Frankenstein.
Was he happy with the wheelhouse he was playing in? I mean, did he have loftier ambitions, or was he happy just exactly where he was?
Yeah, he always wished later that he had a decent budget just once to show that he could actually, you know, do something with better production values and you know, not so low budget. But he never got that. So what he was able to do was complete a film with very limited resources. That was his skill.
In many ways, it's more about the purity of cinema. Even if you're talking about something like Hell's Bloody Devils, it's the purity of the excitement about just making a movie, about putting a band together and getting something done on film.
Very much so. Very much so.
He knew that, like, he wasn't making, you know, great movies, but he wasn't, like, ashamed of it or anything like that. He was kind of more like, you know, a lot of the bad movie people, first of all, they're amazed that anybody knows who they are. So when people started seeking them out, they're like, you've seen these movies? Like, they can't believe that.
Throughout the years, a loyal group of cult movie followers did remember Al Adamson. He would come face to face with their giddy enthusiasm on the convention circuit. But even those who didn't know Adamson from his reputation as a cult movie director would soon associate his name with a far more ghoulish form of infamy.
So tell me a little bit about the latter part of his life. His wife passed.
She passed in 1992, but he got out of the movie business in the early 80s because the drive-in market had ceased to be, basically. He didn't have... It was too much hard work to actually make a living from making movies, and he did do quite well. I mean, he was quite a shrewd business person. He invested the money that he did make in real estate and other business ventures. He had a barbecue restaurant in Hollywood for a while. He did quite well in the end, but then Regina passed away, and she was kind of his life. And so after that, he was a little bit lost. But then he moved to his property in Palm Springs, or Indio, California, which is just outside of Palm Springs. And he lived there with a contractor called Fred Fulford, who was basically there to do up the house. And he kind of became Al's buddy, you know, and they would, you know, hang out together. And at the same time, they had this, according to Fulford, they had this agreement where basically once the house was done, they'd sell it and they'd split it. But Al started to figure out that Fred was stealing from him and was forging checks and charging stuff that he wasn't authorized to charge and stuff like that. And was going to, the last anyone heard from Al directly, he was going to confront Fred about this. And then he disappeared.
The shocking scenes you're about to see are not suggested for the weak or immature.
It's likely that Adamson did confront Fulford about the charges on his credit card. And following that confrontation, it is believed that Fulford bludgeoned Adamson to death and buried his remains under 42 inches of cement, which he laid in the space that was once occupied by Adamson's indoor jacuzzi. It took weeks before the authorities uncovered Adamson's remains, but after they did, Fulford was put on trial for his murder and sentenced to 25 years to life.
I remember my neighbor, knowing that I was a horror film fan, just shouting up to me and saying, "Hey Dave, did you hear that the director of Five Bloody Graves has been found in a bloody grave?" It was that thing where he'd obviously read a headline which said, "Director of Five Bloody Graves found in a bloody grave." Oh, isn't that funny? And then it's like, no, that's not funny at all. That's really grim. You know, when it happened, I remember thinking that was particularly distasteful, and particularly the way the media perceives horror is that basically, you know, once you play with fire, then basically you get burnt. You know, that was kind of the inference from these lurid headlines, whereas obviously they're way more tasteless than any film that Al Adamson made. You know, the way that the mainstream media handles something like this, that they could just dismiss this person in favor of an almost amusing, lurid headline. That's so typical of the media and the way they perceive horror films and people who watch them and people who make them.